Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. My name's Justin. My pronouns are he and him, and I'll be in the role of facilitating both our virtual and our in-person session today. Now, first, I'm going to go into a little bit more about the structure today because we've got a dual session. It's going to be delivered virtually. There's going to be a forum. We're going to be moving into our branch work afterwards. So I'll move into a little bit about how we're going to structure the session today. But first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that we're facilitating this forum today, virtually and in person, on stolen land across so-called Australia. Within Magan-djin, Brisbane, we're on the land of the Yagara and the Turrbal people. Just want to recognise that there's no treaty or land is stolen, and we join in calls for First Nations justice across Australia, and recognise First Nations sovereignty always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to also recognise as a non-Indigenous Australian that I continue to benefit from the ongoing harm of Australia's settler colonialism, white supremacy and genocide. And the settler colonial violence in Australia is linked to that, which is ongoing settler colonial violence in Palestine, who we are, of course, in solidarity with. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're looking into today. So thank you very much to Winnie for joining us again from America. Winnie, I'm going to pass to you to introduce yourself shortly after getting through a few administrative points. And people are going to see me look down a lot because I've got a lot of notes today to go through. So just to let you know. So we want to recognise today that we're exploring Zohran Mamdani's victory as a beacon of hope. And we want to recognise this is not without contention and questions and mixed feelings. So when we get to parts of the discussion today around questions and dialogue towards Winnie or towards other members, we're just going to invite people to remember how strong they feel and how tenacious that they practice with respect. And we're going to be comradely, and we're going to embody the equality and the respect and the consideration in our actions that we want for the world that we're moving to. So just wanting to really invite people into that today. Now, what we're hopeful to do with the structure of today is we're going to have our forum first, which is going to include contributions first and foremost by Winnie, who's joining us as a guest speaker today. I will be facilitating and then passing over to Alex, who's a long-time activist with the Socialist Alliance, is going to support us in navigating what Mamdani might mean in the Australian perspective. And then we're going to invite a dialogue with both people online as well as people in person here in Brisbane. And when the forum comes to an end, for those who wish to participate in the branch meeting afterwards for Brisbane, we invite some of our Queensland comrades to stay online after the 15-minute break to then come into the more direct organisational work we'll be doing afterwards. And of course, if you've got questions at any point of time, please do, and you're virtual, please do let us know through the online portal. That's okay, Alex, that they do? Yep. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so now we might formally move into the forum. So now we do want to respect that Winnie is coming to us from America, which is not in the middle of the day, quite late at night. So thank you so much, Winnie. So I just want to, we thought we'd start with me just offering a few reflections. I recall when we were looking at organising this forum and how to, I guess, kind of publicise it, we were looking at the language of beacon of hope, and there was conversation around, is a beacon of hope ? Is a beacon of hope ? You know, like, what does it mean to invite a conversation around hope as socialists? Because it's complicated. We're people who recognise that capitalism is a dominant force, it oppresses all of us, and we are trying to be really deliberate and careful in the work that we are doing to resist capitalism and create a free world. So we're not wanting to embrace an unhelpful hope, but sometimes we can scrutinize and criticize so automatically that we can suffocate hope at the same time. So hope for socialists is complicated, and I think that there's probably no person, no group of people really who are better situated at the moment in the American context to talk about some of these questions around hope and struggle and collective organising in a very adverse system than the people power behind the Mamdani campaign. So that's what I'm especially interested in today. Now, Winnie, I was wondering if you'd like to, we thought we'd invite you to introduce yourself, and then if you wanted to just take the floor before taking on any questions for about 15 to 20 minutes. How does that sound to you?
Sounds good. Would you be able to remind me at some time intervals so I don't take up too much time here?
Absolutely. I'll get a clock started now.
Great. Okay, well, I'll start off by introducing myself and saying thank you so much for inviting me. I've had the honor of being able to talk to a number of our international comrades over the past few weeks about the Mamdani campaign. And I think it's just so important that we're constantly learning from each other because I think, as mentioned, it's a time of hope. It's also a time of a lot of fear and questions and entering experiments that we have not done before, and we all have to be learning from each other internationally. And as I always remind people, the capitalist class is organized internationally, so socialists have to be organized internationally as well. So I'm excited to be talking with you today and hope to learn more about y'all's organizing projects in the future. But I am a member of New York City DSA. I joined in 2020 when Bernie Sanders was running for president for the second time, and was inspired by his campaign to join a student activist group at my university. And also, actually, I'll shout out one of our other New York City DSA members, Michael, a friend of mine, hopped on tonight to watch. So bless Michael for staying up late too to hear more about this. But I will say, so I joined DSA in 2020. It also happened to be the same year that Zohran Mamdani was elected to our state assembly in New York as a cadre candidate, as we like to say, meaning that he was an elected leader of our DSA chapter and prompted to run as a slate of 6 candidates who swept their elections following a lot of COVID disruption to our general electoral system, and set the foundation for a Socialist in Office committee in New York City and New York State, which we've been working to slowly grow over the past few years, not without its difficulties. Definitely a project we've all been trying to figure out together, how our organization can hold people accountable, how we can use this small block to our advantage. And I think Zohran in particular has always been somebody who was focused more on the external communications around what we were doing, not just focusing on internal legislative negotiation, but really how we spread that message to the broader working class of our city and continue to bring people into our movement. And that's why last year, when he started to talk to people about a crazy idea to run for mayor, I think a few of us were like, oh, well, that is a crazy idea, but he might just be the right person to do it. And the reason why, I'll give a broader political context around this race, why we decided to run. So, as I'm sure many of you are aware, in the US, the right wing has been on an incline over the past few years as working class people in our country are facing horrific conditions around inaffordability across all sectors, whether or not it's grocery, housing, their wages stagnating. The right wing has been able to capture that fear and pin it onto the most vulnerable segments of our population, whether or not that's immigrants, whether or not that's trans people, whether or not that's other portions of the working class that they can marginalize and blame for these affordability crises in different in different respects. And so Donald Trump has, in the rise to power, been able to capture a lot of the fears and agitation of working class people in our country. But the Democrats, who are supposed to be, our more left party, but are also controlled by the capitalist class, have not presented any vision to the alternative. They continue to say we should be doing politics as it's always been done, and they're running the same show over and over again, and they're not actually showing anybody that they're any different from the Democrats or from the Republicans, besides not necessarily pinning everything onto the marginalized, but just saying that we have to continue to make modest reforms. And coming out of that, so many of us as socialists in New York City, we're looking at our city, which voted for Trump more than New York City, which is usually thought to be a Democratic stronghold, that we voted overwhelmingly for Trump. Not that he won in New York City, but it shifted way to the right. And there was no other way that we could see this other than the fact that people were really feeling the strain of the affordability, and at least Donald Trump was offering people some hope that there was change. And we knew that in the next race for mayor, if there was a candidate who could actually touch on the issues that mattered most to people, that there would be an opportunity to really bring people into our movement, to show them that there's a path forward that isn't just the right-wing hatred and vitriol and fear that they're constantly sowing, and something that is actually empowering to working class people, and against the exploitation of our corporations. So, Zohran, because particularly within our mayoral elections in 2021 in New York, we adopted a new system of voting, which was ranked choice voting. So people can rank their candidates based on single transferable vote. It makes it easier for, more outsider candidates to come in and get a higher percentage of the population without kind of threatening to split the vote away from less progressive or less socialist or leftist, candidates. And then also additionally, another important election reform we had was matching funds, which means that the state, okay, great. Which means that the state matches any funds that individual donors in our city make up to 8 times, which means that we were looking at this and we were saying, okay, I mean, a lot of us thought there's no way that Zohran's going to win this thing. But what we can do is use the millions of dollars that we're going to receive in matching funds to now propagandize to a whole new population of New Yorkers who have never heard our message before, but are looking for some kind of change and need some kind of change because our rents are skyrocketing and our costs of living are skyrocketing every day, and people are feeling the effects of that. And so part of that is, Zohran's bigger strategy around communications. And within his campaign, I think he did a really good job. I'll talk about internally organizing within DSA to try to make it feel like a campaign that all of the multi-tendencies of our organization could adopt and participate in different ways. And so we endorsed him, and we started a ground game of knocking doors, and ended up in the primary. I'm not sure what it was in the general, but in the primary election, which is usually the biggest election for New York City because it is such a Democratic stronghold. Most people are registered Democrats. We ended up knocking 1.5 million doors across the city with 100,000 volunteers, and continuing to recruit people. And his social media presence gained a whole new viewership from people across the city who ranged in ideological spectrum before, but also people who had never voted before. I think a real issue with a lot of our campaigns and continuing to build independence as socialists is that we get locked into continuing to reach out to the same voters over and over again, who are the centrists who have typically voted for establishment Democrats, because we expect them to vote and we can't really get reliably new people to vote. And Zohran's campaign, by having this very effective message of a few policy platforms that he reiterated over and over again, freezing the rent for rent-controlled tenants, fast and free buses, universal child care, creating a community safety department to divert funds from police responding to mental health crises, that these things that really connected with people was able to bring out new voters that we hadn't seen before, and overwhelmingly young people were voting in our city. So those were all very exciting aspects that continue to bring people in, and particularly we were lucky in this campaign in some ways that we were running against basically the biggest archetype of capitalist evil person who's been in office for way too long and has done so many terrible things, named Andrew Cuomo. He used to be the governor of New York State. And in his time as governor of New York State, he made several policy misgivings, as well as, was credibly accused of sexual assault by over a dozen women. And, during the pandemic, he completely mismanaged our older adult facilities, leading to the deaths of hundreds of older adults in our city. That did not need to happen. And so, like, coming into this race, somebody who's totally apathetic and thinks that he can walk into it because of the money he has, because he is funded by all these large donors and these large PACs, he completely wrote off Zohran and his campaign. But slowly over time, the real drastic alternative to him, who was Zohran, gained more momentum because the people who were more centrist progressives that others thought at the start of the race might excel instead of Zohran, weren't presenting enough of a contrast to this like evil figure that was controlling a lot of our money. And I think too, in addition, what we can see is that again, a lot of young voters voted for Zohran, and that's because a lot of young people in our country have been radicalized over the past couple of years in response to Palestine and seeing that there's a horrific genocide going on in Gaza, and still having no response from our elected officials, and still having this very apathetic thing while our tax dollars continue to go to fund genocide over years. That has triggered, a response where people are ready and to take action when somebody actually speaks to their vision and their demands. So I think those are some reasons why Zohran was able to actually win in our original election, but also do so in a way that wasn't just taking a shortcut to winning, but really changing the minds and ideas of people to the extent where coming out of the ballot box, people were registering polls that they identified as socialists to even a greater extent than we could imagine. Like the percentages kind of skyrocketed. So these are all positive signs. But do all those people know what it means to be a democratic socialist? That's going to continue to be a question, because one thing that I must mention is that being a mayor is a really complicated position. Our bureaucracy of New York City government that a mayor has to manage is so huge, because our economy in New York City is so huge. The amount of social service programs that they have to manage and also like contract out to other service providers is such a job with so many contradictions that it's just, you couldn't put the most socialist person alive in this position and expect New York City to become socialist overnight, because we still exist in a capitalist system. So now the question is, how do we use this position and use our position as DSA, both independently, but also with our relationship to Zohran, to both pressure him into socialist action, but also how do we use this floor to take that independence as socialists to organize in our city right now? Because that's a real question, is now we don't have our last mayor, who was centrist and complied with Donald Trump and was willing to let immigration enforcement onto our streets into violent raids. How do we now use our place to be able to, having a mayor who's friendlier to our movement, organize and really get people in the streets active around putting his policy platform into place in a way that doesn't center him as an individual, but centers us as a working class movement across our city? And so some of the ways that we're planning to do that is through a large scale pressure campaign to try to get a lot of his policies passed at the state level, which is needed in order for us to have the funding to pass a lot of these things, is taxes to change at the state level, taxes on the ultra wealthy in our state, but also corporate taxes, and additionally like other sources of funding that we can get. But a lot of that has to come from the state level. So how do we now wage a pressure campaign where we can really, as a movement that's the socialist, but also broader than that, fight for Zohran's agenda. There's now an organization that's popping up that, you know, is more of like a larger representative, broad force, called Our Time, that will be, you know, running the backbone of that campaign. But it's going to be multi-layered effort, also using the other socialists that we have in office to try to get their constituents to rally around these demands. So all this is going to be a really exciting time and a really complicated time to engage with a lot of these questions. Why it's so important for us to be in communication, you know, across the globe, across our country, and across our city to try to figure out these next steps. I know I'm coming from this as, and I think we're running out of time, but I work for one of our city council members in New York City. Her name's Alex Bainbridge. And an interesting thing about the city council in New York City is that so much of your responsibility is to do oversight over the mayoral authority. And for the past 4 years, when she's been a city council member, we've had a horrible mayor. That's been a really easy job. We stop him from doing terrible things. We sue him when he does terrible things, and we, you know, take all of his administration into our hearings with like fervor and aggression to try to get the truth out of them because of all the corruption that we've needed to weed out. Now, how do we operate doing oversight over this mayoral authority that in some ways is going to be, you know, in line with us, and in other ways is going to have to capitulate to other capitalist demands? And how do we do that in a way that's in tandem with DSA, building power for our movements, and not hurting things? And I think a lot of people have different debates on that, or different ideas on that, and that's an ongoing debate and something that we'll have to take step by step. And so that's my opening about Zohran. I'm very hopeful and excited about this, and I think it's a very empowering time for a lot of working class people in New York, and it's a really interesting time to be a socialist and engage with these experiments and questions. So I'm excited to hear more about you all's questions today.
I'm uncertain how well that applause was captured on the audio, but thank you so much, Winnie. Really appreciate you taking the time again to connect with us over in so-called Australia. So we will be moving into some discussion shortly, but beforehand, wanting to invite Alex to talk a bit about what Mamdani might mean in an Australian context. Do you want to take the mic?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. My name's Alex. As Justin said, I'm from Socialist Alliance here in Magan-djin, Brisbane. Now, I'm trusting people online can hear, and if they can't, they will let me know in short order. Justin began by saying, you know, the question of the beacon of hope, is this an exclamation mark or a question mark? And I personally come at this very much with the sense that this is an exclamation mark. I think it's, in my opinion, it is very clear that Mamdani's victory has inspired so many people. I mean, obviously in New York, obviously you can see 104,000 people volunteered, all the people that got involved in the campaign. But even as far away in Australia, outside of the country, outside of the world, there are so many people that are inspired by Mamdani's victory. And I think that our job here is to try and capture up as much of that as possible, and direct it into building the activist campaigns, and in particular building the socialist movement, organisations like Socialist Alliance, to actually take that further. I think one of the things which is one of the problems on the left is that so often our experience is that we're losing in the campaigns that we're fighting, or even sometimes when we win campaigns, we're basically, the campaign is simply to defend something that they were trying to take away, and we sort of managed to stop them from taking it away. And I think what we need is that sort of positive vision that actually people power is supreme. People power is stronger than every capitalist government. People power is stronger than their media, stronger than their military, stronger than their police forces. People power is the strength, and it is possible for us to win. And I think that's one of the that's the key takeaway from Mamdani's victory in New York. Now, obviously, for socialist election campaigns are only one part of the struggle. They're not the be all and end all. We certainly don't have a vision that just by winning elections is the pathway towards socialism. On the other hand, it is a fact that most people in countries like in Australia, and I presume the United States as well, view politics through the prism of elections, and it has an impact that whether or not we can win electoral victories. And And that is part of the process of building, building the grassroots, movements, campaigns and social movements and trade unions that is necessary to actually, to actually win more far-reaching changes. And there's obviously people online will have noticed. I mean, there's a bunch of people that are basically saying, "Oh well, Zohran Mamdani, he's Trump calls him a communist, but really he's barely even a socialist. He's a liberal or reformist or whatever else." I mean, like, and to me, I actually think it's a little bit. I personally think we should be a little bit cautious about jumping to too early conclusions. I think that we should be, recognising the possibility that this could go multiple ways. And I think actually I strongly agree with the comments that Paul LeBlanc made when I interviewed him a few weeks back. He said, if Mamdani wins, there's no way that his program can be implemented without a grassroots people's popular campaign to actually break down the obstacles, which no doubt there are going to be many obstacles from all of the capitalist institutions in New York and more broadly. It can't just that reform program can't be won simply by just actions from the office of mayor. It's going to take a people's movement to actually help to achieve those things. And the fact that those demands that Mamdani has made have been popularised by that campaign, that's a tremendous asset towards building that people's power movement. That's the first point that I would make. And that even if, as Paul LeBlanc also said, you can't rule out, it's not excluded, Mamdani either might cave to the pressure or else sell out. I mean, certainly from here, it's impossible for us to sort of rule that out or judge it. But even in that circumstance, people will learn something from the experience, and that also is going to count, or that's going to be helpful for that broader project of building a mass people's movement for social change. But in terms of, I think I wanted to pose a question. What would the most super revolutionary, what some would say, what some would call red-blooded socialists do if they had the position of mayor or something else? And I think it's actually quite instructive to go back to the Communist Manifesto. And then in the Communist Manifesto, when Marx and Engels are summarising the strategy of the working class movement, one of the things they say is, in the beginning, the project of the working class transformation of society cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionising the mode of production. So, I mean, to me, I think the revolutionary program in New York is exactly to try and implement the measures that Mamdani has put forward that appear economically insufficient, but require a people's movement to actually to achieve them, and therefore therefore I guess that's why I feel hopeful. In that there's a struggle yet to unfold, and that struggle is going to determine the answer. You can't determine this thing by just like looking at positions on paper. You need to actually engage in the struggle. And in terms of bringing it back home to Australia, what that means for us here, we need to actually organise ourselves as strongly as we can to be in as strong a position as possible to wage that fight, to actually to campaign for, to build, and obviously to build the campaigns that like obviously we've been the Palestine Solidarity campaign is very strongly in Australia in the last couple of years, but also other campaigns, housing campaigns, trade union struggles. We need to build these as much as possible. We also need to build the socialist movement. So yes, I think this is a moment of hope, and what that means is join up, get involved. At the moment, we're very close, actually, extremely close to registering Socialist Alliance in Queensland, and other states are doing similar things. And basically, we're making an appeal to you: grab this moment of hope with both hands, and actually throw ourselves into the socialist movement, and in particular in Socialist Alliance. that's my comments. Thanks everyone for thanks Winnie for your comments before, and look forward to the discussion.
All right, so look, we're going to move a little bit into kind of opening up to the floor for a few questions. Now I've come prepared with a lot of questions, as I always do. You can suck out the air in the room pretty quick, probably even virtually as well. But can I get a show of hands in the audience here how many people have a question that they're curious about? Because that'll give me a bit of a lead to how many I might start with. We got one? Two? Yep. All right.
And online as well, obviously.
And of course, online as well. Okay, great. Just before I jump in too far. Excellent. Brilliant. We've got indications from people. Winnie, it looks like there's a lot of enthusiasm to field some questions. Are you okay to stick around for a little while longer and answer a few questions?
Yes, we're good.
Lovely. Right. So, look, I will start with one of my own before moving into it. So something I also wanted to reflect as you were talking, Alex, is I think there's something came up for me around we're so socialized to feel like our role in politics starts and ends with casting a vote, and then we just kind of leave someone there to do the work. So when you were talking about, you know, people power continuing to make the change, that was something that really resonated with me. Okay, so my question moves a little bit away from Mamdani, a little bit more towards the people power behind him, Winnie. Can I ask a question about that? Is that all right? So I can getting a thumbs up.
Yeah,
That's
I
okay.
nodded. I think you're looking away, but ask away.
So what I was curious about is if people wanted to replicate the success of the Mamdani campaign in moving the masses and engaging with people that would otherwise be apathetic or running disengaged. I particularly resonate with your comments around reaching out to people and engaging people that we usually wouldn't. How would you suggest that they begin?
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to the strategy. And so to break it down in this way, I think there's this sort of communications aspect, like the way that he did his social media and aligns his platform. Then there's the field aspect, which would be like the number of people that we talk to on the ground at the doors. And then I would say a third aspect that is maybe newer to a lot of things that we're trying to do is the kind of cultural energy aspect. And I think that the campaign did all of these things well. Of particularly New York City, DSA has, over its course of all of the state and city campaigns it's run over the past few years, established a really strong foundation for a field program to just knock doors constantly, to talk to people, to have these conversations, and to do that in a really thorough way that also impacts people who come to knock doors, then to become field leads, and then to become neighborhood captains, and then to become field coordinators. And the thing about this campaign was that we had the unbridled ability to capture people wherever they lived in the city. We weren't limited to one smaller geographic districts that we are in, like city council races where it's harder for people to get to. On the communications aspect, I think being really present in the places that matter to people, as much as stereotypical as it is, but in social media, in these video formats, and speaking to the issues of the moment, because I think that's really part of it, is like constantly being responsive. And that goes into the cultural energy. Is one thing that he did really well. Was, I'm sure people have seen, if they've been following the campaign, pictures of these really huge rallies of all of the t-shirts and everything that they created to have this real visual presence on the ground in New York City. And Michael, I don't know if you felt this way too. But I would walk into places and people would see my Zohran pin and be like, "Oh, do you really think that guy's gonna win?" And it would be like, "Yeah, I do. Wouldn't that be great?" And it's just this sort of like in-person element of continuing to socialize that within New York City, and having people see themselves as a part of the campaign and have ownership from a really broad coalition outside of our socialist organization, while keeping foundational to the socialist messaging. I know that was a long answer to the question. I'll keep it shorter for the future questions.
No, thank you, Winnie. That's incredibly helpful and insightful. You probably saw us here on the other end trying to figure out how to manage the wealth of indications to discuss that we've got both in the room and virtually. So how about we take the first three people online? What do you think? Yeah, who have we got? I'm looking to. Okay, well, we might take from Arlo, and then we might move to Jacob after Arlo. Arlo, would you like to come online and share your question with Winnie for us?
Yeah. I'm hello. I'm not muted anymore. Yeah, my question is about like today's like recent development of Mamdani's meeting with Trump in the White House and all of this. I haven't had time per se to quite sit down and read everything. I've been at work today. But what is the general feeling for you guys over there with this whole news of Trump saying that he'll like surprise the conservatives and make the liberals happy and stuff like that? And that's my question.
Just to make sure you
Yeah. You know what? I never really know what to make sense of what Donald Trump says. So it's kind of difficult. I mean, we had the video up at work today and we're like watching in anticipation. The craziest thing, I don't know if you all watched the full thing, was when a reporter said, "Zohran, are you gonna stand by calling Donald Trump a fascist?" And then Donald Trump went, yeah, just say it. We'll move on. That was crazy. I'm just like still reeling from this. Yeah, so I think that it's pretty clear that this is not evidence or to suggest that Zohran is going to be moving towards the right wing. I think Zohran is making the strategic calculation here that in order to kind of get his agenda done and not be constantly infiltrated by like our national military and like ICE operations, which is our immigration enforcement, that making Donald Trump feel like a little bit complacent is better. I think it probably remains to be seen for him and for everyone how long that stands. I've been thinking about for the past hours since I've seen it about what the fuck is going on. Sorry to swear. Yeah, I who knows is the thing. I don't know what the calculation there was, but I think Donald Trump has also just seen that his poll numbers have gone down ridiculously over the past few months, and he's just trying to scramble. And Zohran is, I think, being a little bit opportunistic, if I had to guess in this scenario, but I don't know if it really means much of anything. Who knows what Donald Trump ever means when he opens his mouth.
Thank you very much, Winnie, and thanks for your question, Arlo. We might move next to Jacob in Nam online.
Hello, comrades. So it's Jacob here from Socialist Alliance in Melbourne. So I guess the question I sort of have is, I guess I have two kind of questions, because there's already a kind of precedent for, I guess, a more left-wing kind of mayor, which is being elected as in Brandon Johnson. And I guess my question is sort of because Brandon Johnson, I mean, I guess I've heard mixed assessments of him from DSA members in Chicago, and what makes Zohran Mamdani actually different from Brandon Johnson? The second question is, I guess, probably the biggest sort of promise, I guess, and this is the sort of promise that exists for all these left-wing candidates, regardless of the limitations of their politics or their program. But the excitement with Zohran is this kind of possibility of rebuilding that kind of social base that has actually been decimated by years of neoliberalism, the kind of organised kind of working class. And I guess what are the kind of the challenges, and how do you sort of see Zohran Mamdani's administration actually rebuilding that base of struggle? And also, what is this going to be the role of this new organisation? I mean, I heard you talk about it on the Green Left podcast, but this new organisation that's been set up to mobilise that electoral base. And I guess what are kind of some of the things that are sort of planned for the future. Finish up there.
Yes, I'll answer the second question and then remind me of your first question again, because I had an answer and then now it's gone out of my brain. But yeah, for reactivating the social base, I think that's a real question that DSA has to contend with, because I think Bernie had this phrase that we've adopted in a lot of ways, which was not me, us, which I think we all agree is the right framework for a lot of our elections. And Zohran has become such a popular figure in our city, in our country. Oh, your first question was about Brandon Johnson in Chicago. Now I remember, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so he's become such a popular figure that like kind of finding a way to divide his agenda and this movement from just individually him as a person while still keeping people excited about legislative victories is going to be a challenge. And so that's why I think it's good that this new organization is coming to kind of bring people together and put that into motion around, you know, this tax the rich framework that we've had in New York City for a number of years to try to pass a similar policy agenda on the state level, but now it's kind of in tandem with Zohran. And I think this sets him up as, even though as a mayor, you have to like appeal to a bunch of different constituencies and like capitalist interests, just because there's like no really way around that in a lot of ways, which I could go into in more depth some other time or now if you guys want. But I think it's important for us to continue to like be defending him to other people as a movement in that sort of way, where it's like, you know, now we're putting the pressure on the governor or the federal administration to have these things happen, and having the movement there. With Brandon Johnson in Chicago, definitely things that we're trying to learn lessons from. One thing is that Brandon came out of the Chicago Teachers Union, which is great to have a labor activist or labor organizer come to you know, City Hall. But then his administration was filled almost entirely with people from the teachers union, which meant that the teachers union itself got depleted, and then his base of organizing to fight for him was really depleted as well, like almost immediately after he became mayor. So then that organizing structure, very similar to the difference of what we're trying to do with things like our time or like in New York City DSA, that organizing structure was depleted. So the energy behind it to like actually holds him to a progressive standard was depleted as well. So I think that part of it is, you know, trying to make sure that things like that don't happen. Like New York City DSA still has its independence, and our time still has this independence away from Zohran, as he has to, you know, do things that we probably would not agree with in general.
Thanks very much, Jacob, for your question, and Winnie for the answers to multiple difficult questions to struggle with. I'm going to come back to the room, Magan-djin now, just to see if there's anyone who's interested in asking a question. So now, or forever hold your peace. 3, 2, 1. There you go, Jonathan, come on over.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I want to ask you to dive. What was the experience of being a campaigner? Zohran, I guess I could say yours, but perhaps how you see other people's experiences, and also in relation to that, the DSA or its different chapters. What sort of things have they decided they were going to focus on in terms of organising that 100,000 people to take part? What were the focus? Okay. What were the different things they particularly wanted to focus on in order to try and make that happen and actually help people be organised to be part of the campaign?
Yeah, the experience was great. Everything that I can say is knocking doors for Zohran has been just fun and exciting. And again, I'm going to this from I work for one of our socialist city council members. She was also running for re-election this year. So her campaign, all of the campaign efforts were overlapped with Zohran's campaign. So, you know, we would go to doors and talk to people about Alexa, who had a lot of sway with older voters, and they'd be like, "Oh, I've heard about Alexa, but who's this Zohran guy?" And we'd be like, "Oh, he's really great." But then we'd go to young people who had heard about Zohran, and then they'd be like, "Well, who's this Alexa lady?" And we'd be like, "Oh, they have the same platform, they're running for the same things." And it just felt like a moment of seeing all of our work building on each other to kind of create this energy, which was really great. It's also been so great for it to be like this kind of cultural aspect in our city, that people feel they can come together and that they really have somebody who's a representative for them and fighting for them, and just hope in politics. Because the main thing that you get campaigning here, and I'm sure it's similar there in most places right now, is talking to people on the streets or at the doors or on the phones who are like, "I stopped voting because nothing ever happens and I don't really care. And all of these people don't stand for me." And to finally be able to strongly say to any New Yorker, not just people who are in the district or already like registered on the Democratic Party, you know, for like the general election, that you can really vote and have an impact, and that this person's going to change things. And after coming out of a number of years in New York City politics with never like a strong left voice coming for mayor, like in our last election in 2021, there just wasn't any real progressive candidate. This is just such an impactful change, and coming out of a mayor who was so widely hated because of such deep corruption, it was just exciting that way. How do we recruit people, and what do we focus on in that way to be volunteers? I think it comes, like, you know, a lot of people gravitated to the platform, and then it's this context of trying to bring people into like local neighborhood groups where they come back for recurring canvases, and then they kind of create, you know, community there. And that's a big part of what we're also trying to achieve through like every campaign, is really making people feel empowered in the movement, and also like they have a place within it. And I think there was another aspect to that question, but not that I remember. So hopefully I got at some part of it.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Winnie. To my understanding, Laurie is next. Is that the understanding you share as well, Alex? Yeah, brilliant. Alex has helped me out here with the tech. Laurie, if you'd like to get yourself
you.
up and mute and ask a question.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it brief. I did make some notes. Hi, Winnie and Michael in New York. Thanks for joining. I too think it's a beacon of hope with an exclamation mark, but I do have a few questions. One being a really huge one: why keep Jessica Tisch as the NYPD commissioner? That's going to be a big problem, in my opinion. Also, could you maybe speak to, I'm glad you mentioned Alex Bainbridge, in respect to challenging APAC Shakur, as he's known, Hakeem Jeffries, and Mamdani saying that it's you know, it's too early to address primarying Hakeem Jeffries, and I think that sort of ties into the connection with the democratic establishment. And how do you see that? And why is it always too early to do those kind of things, albeit if you've got such a huge grassroots movement, which is really exciting and I think has momentum? I think that was about it. And I think thanks, because you addressed some of the other questions. There's also Chi Osei, who's a New York City Council member, who's also apparently this talk of primarying Hakeem Jeffries. Can you just speak to how that might be important to the movement there? Thanks. If that all made sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Jessica Tisch is a profound disappointment to me as somebody who's been working in city government for a while now. I think that she's been an abhorrent police commissioner. Not that there is probably like an amazing police commissioner that can exist, but she's particularly bad. She's a billionaire. And we've experienced situations in our office where we're trying to fight to defend families whose loved ones have been brutally murdered by the police in New York and have not gotten justice. And Jessica Tisch's deputy commissioners have found them guilty through trial, and she's still promoted the sergeant who enacted these murders. So that to me, I can't really understand the calculation there. I think this speaks to just the level of bureaucracy that exists in the New York City government. A huge thing under the de Blasio administration, who was like our somewhat progressive mayor, back 2 terms ago. Yeah, she's a rabid Zionist, just like evil all around, I would say. It is like Bill de Blasio had a really hard time controlling and managing the NYPD, and that was like a notoriously known fact. And because the NYPD is such a large agency in our city that encompasses so many people, and even the internal bureaucracy just to the NYPD is so in depth, I assume that part of that was with regard to like keeping some of that intact and not maybe like upsetting people in the NYPD who would then like fight against him as he tried to enact his other agenda. My hope is that he fires her at some point, because he can fire people. I don't know, but it is profoundly disappointing that he's kept her. And I assume that there's some kind of trade-off that he's made the assessment is worth it. I would probably say that nothing's worth that, but yeah, that's that. And then with regard to our congressional races this year, I think everybody in New York City DSA is of the mind that so much of our politics is happening on the federal level right now, and we don't have a strong relationship to our federal elected officials just because they were elected before I think DSA was organized enough to even run those campaigns or have an active role in like holding them accountable. And so for us to be able to expand our movement, we need to be fighting the federal fights with regards to immigration, with regards to funding for Israel, with regards to all of the kind of human rights disasters that are happening on in our country in the federal level right now, and including, you know, cuts to things like SNAP benefits, which is like how people get supplemental food assistance, or other things like that. Right now, our federal level is discussing. We need somebody who can pose a real opposite to Donald Trump in Congress. And so there's an appetite to run congressional races. Which races will end up running still remains to be seen. Hakeem Jeffries is this force of evil. And I think also probably the reason why Zohran has said that, if I had to guess, is because Hakeem Jeffries kind of organizes the fundraising for the Democratic Party nationally. So I think people are very threatened by the idea of him having an aggressive challenger. And that's probably put a lot of pressure on Zohran from Democratic establishment politicians. And so that's interesting and will continue to remain to be interesting. Alexa has been endorsed to challenge Dan Goldman, who is an heir to a billionaire fortune, a Congress member who's also a rabid Zionist, and that's continuing to see if we're gonna run that race or which congressional races will run. But I do think that what I can say generally is that there is his name, he's actually an heir to the Levi fortune, like the Levi jeans. I don't know if that's also popular in Australia, but lots of money there. But that being said, what remains true regardless of which races it is that there is a hunger to be fighting the federal fights and to be doing it in a broad scale and with the similar communications and lessons that we've learned from Zohran.
Thanks, Winnie.
Thanks, team. Now, I apologize. I've been doing my best to try and keep an order here. So if I make some mistakes, please bear with me. I've got Rachel and then Luke as based in the chat. So is Rachel from Sydney available to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, comrades. Thanks heaps, Winnie. I'm in the camp of Zohran Mamdani got elected ! And I saw on a reel someone took footage of when the results came in, New York skyline, and there was just all these cheers from the people. And you know, it's raised expectations here in so-called Australia as well. Both in the socialist movement, in Socialist Alliance, but also more broadly in the movements. And there's 3 campaigns that I want to ask you about. The rent freeze. So there was one post that suggests that the Mamdani team is looking to forcibly acquire houses from landlords that don't repair the homes. So like forcibly acquire. So if you could comment on that, that would be awesome. Then the other question is on Palestine, and Mamdani has said that Netanyahu's not just not welcome, but he will be arrested. Can you please comment on that? Also, he's committed to the BDS in New York. Can you comment on what that, if there's anything more specific? And the final question is the mental health responders. So we've got this campaign here too. We don't have councils funding police. So it's a bit different. We're calling on the states to provide the funding for mental health responders. Can you unpick that in any detail? And then just one last thing, you've got a Seattle DSA mayor as well now too. If you want to comment on how many mayors there are now in the DSA camp, that'd be great. Thanks. Luke?
Yes.
Well, Luke, you go.
Okay. About 8 years ago, all these rallies and causes like Women for Climate, whatever, was really strong, and then 2 years later they disappeared. Do you think, I see these rallies in DC, Charlotte, Chicago, LA, San Diego, etc. How confident or otherwise are you that this will grow this time?
Cool. That's it. Thanks, comrades.
Okay, to summarize quickly before you go, it was the question about acquiring homes that have been not taken care of by landlords, rent freeze, arresting Netanyahu, how many DSA members we have, and then our confidence about growing out of this movement. Are those, did I miss anything?
I know the DSA mayors. How many DSA mayors do you have? Because you've got Seattle as well.
Yeah, so I'll start with that one. I think I don't know as much about the Seattle mayor, although I know that she was running against a terrible incumbent and just narrowly skated by winning the election, which is amazing. I don't know if she was endorsed by Seattle DSA, but I do know that she is a Democratic Socialist and identifies publicly as such. So that's exciting. And then I think that that's pretty much all for DSA mayors, although I'll say too, across the country, we have city and state level elected officials that have been growing over time. Rent freeze and the homes, I'm not entirely sure what people were referring to with regards to him taking over places that are left deteriorated by landlords. What I can think of is there's two bills, one on the city level, one on the state level, where if a landlord wants to sell a building that they own, this building will get first right of refusal by the tenants. Working on the city level, this bill would be in compliance with community trust, which is like nonprofit agencies that could fund the building, or on the state level, it would be funding from the state to fund their tenant union to buy their apartments. So those are two bills that he's always supported. So it's like the being able to get the tenants or like a nonprofit partner to buy and fund their own apartments so that people don't get evicted and then the building gets gentrified. That's one thing. But with regards to the rent freeze, how that works is 20% of our housing stock in New York City is rent controlled, which is a policy that went into place a long time ago, but it means that particular buildings can only raise their rents by the percentage every year that a rent guidelines board decides, which means that the mayor gets to appoint a lot of the seats on the rent guidelines board, and then other people are, like chosen by other groups. So this is one of Zohran's most feasible proposals, is freezing the rent, because he can replace a lot of the rent guidelines board who could just vote to not raise the rents next year, which I hope happens because I live in a rent controlled apartment. So selfishly, that is one thing that I do very much care about. But additionally, Eric Adams, who's the outgoing mayor, has tried to mess that up by stacking the rent guidelines board before he leaves to make it more difficult or take a longer time for Zohran to be able to implement rent freeze. So that might take like a year or two. With regards to arresting Netanyahu, he has promised to arrest Netanyahu. I would also say, on our city level, we've moved towards divestment in the way that like our city's pension funds over the past few years have been divested from Israel, which they were previously invested in. But our incoming comptroller, and this is getting really into the weeds of New York City government, but who manages the pension funds is a Zionist. So it is possible that there will be reinvestment back into Israel bonds, and this is a campaign that's ongoing to try to stop that. And then, but yeah, with Jessica Tisch as the police commissioner, do we have trust that Netanyahu would be arrested upon entering New York City? I think that'll be a question of how Zohran is able to wield his mayoral authority over a non-compliant police commissioner, and that's like the risk he runs by appointing a police commissioner who's not compliant with him. So hopefully he's made that calculation and that it will be successful. What I will say is there is a Republican council member who wrote a letter to Netanyahu to invite him to come to New York City on January 1st, when Zohran is getting when he takes office. So this is I don't think he'll accept that invitation from a random city council member, but it was kind of ridiculous and interesting. And then how confident that we'll grow? I don't know. I'm hopeful that we will grow, but I also know that in our movement, always there are periods of growth and periods of stagnation, and we have to just try to keep the energy alive and meet the moment for as long as we can to try to expand on this growth. And I think New York City DSA has been doing a good job at trying to continue to funnel that energy ongoing into new projects and to really do well at onboarding new members and empowering them as leaders in ways that honestly New York City hasn't done as well at in past years. So I feel hopeful about that, but I also know that, you know, the Zohran momentum doesn't last forever, so we have to continue to try to build that in different ways. And then I see this question in the chat, but I'm not sure if there's a different order to things, so tell me.
Thanks, Winnie. We might get to that question in the chat after a few patiently waiting people. And thank you so much for the extensive answers you're providing to a few double, triple, and even 4, 5 barrel questions. It's we really appreciate the extensiveness of the responses. Now, this might be my error. I have either Jen or Brendan next, and I think I skipped Brendan. So Jen, are you comfortable if I go to Brendan first? Just give me a little thumbs up. Jen was first? All right. Thanks, Alex, for your support. Jen, we'll go with you. Brendan, you will be next.
Thanks. Thanks very much. And thank you, Winnie. And it's really fantastic to have you and very inspiring what you've done in New York. But I was very interested in what you said about how when this starts to get underway, putting in the policies, that you want to try and centre the movement, the DSA, rather than focus on the individual. And you touched on that a little bit before, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, because so much of media and politics and reporting focuses on the individual. And I wonder if there's been any strategies developed about how to centre the movement rather than have focus on Mamdani.
Yeah, I think the biggest strategy right now is to try to build that organization that's separate from him. But I also think that's an internal question in DSA, and maybe not everybody is like fully bought into the idea that it needs to be separate. And that's going to be something that takes time to reveal itself in different ways. But I think our time is sort of like a solution to that, is like having a different banner that centers more of the policies. But then I also think that'll be a question how that works in tandem with our other races this year, in both the state and federal level, and what energy we're diverting there and how we're continuing to amass that and grow it. But I think that'll also naturally happen in time. Like, I think there will be moments where we are forced to like pick fights with Zohran as we would any other mayor, even though he is our own. And I hope that I guess my comrades and DSA are ready to take those strategic fights while also defending him from, too much criticism as far as speculating like on the nitty gritty of the everyday, because there again are going to be a lot of things that he does that we don't agree with, but as long as he's ultimately like moving the project forward and the good outweighs the bad and he is meeting these demands that he's promised, I think it'll be a net benefit. And so it's trying to focus on that more. I also think, labor is always going to be a big part of it. How can we continue to empower unions and workers to organize, to create these fights? Like, there was a lot of like city workers for Zohran or like teachers for Zohran that operated within the trade unions to try to organize their coworkers. So how do we empower those groups to now be focused on their workplaces or bettering themselves outside of Zohran and just using this activity towards, increased worker organization in general?
Great, thank you.
Great question, Jen. Thanks for the response, Winnie. We'll move to Brendan. And if anyone in the room here in Magan-djin wants to indicate so they're put on the list, just get my attention. So take it away, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I was wondering, did DSA have a recruiting strategy during the campaign? And if so, what was it and how successful was it? Also, how was working with other groups like the Working Families Party and unions? Thank you.
Yeah, our recruitment strategy, in general, like I mentioned, we do canvassing and we have a pretty tried and true method of recruiting people into different expanding leadership positions through our campaign. I think sometimes, honestly, the problem is like now we've recruited a ton of leaders in the electoral thing. How do we get them, politically educated as socialists and like coming into our organization? But we were able to grow our membership by several thousand in New York City and several thousand more nationally as DSA through this campaign, which was great. I think at times Zohran's campaign like focused on, they were unabashedly socialist always, but sometimes it's too encouraging people to join other organizations, which I think is good. We want people to be in an organization generally and DSA to be as a coalition and like a broader working class movement, but like a socialist pole within that and constantly fighting for that like socialist lens. However, DSA was always at the front and center, and WFP, I think sometimes, was a little bit sad that they weren't at the front and center of this race, but also they endorsed him very late. So what can be said about the consequences of your own actions. That being said, WFP by the end was a proud endorser of Zohran. There were a lot of other organizations that proudly endorsed him, and I think a big part of that was bringing people together just on the neighborhood level to try to organize. But I think one big thing is like, we have our canvases and we come together as a group, and there's initially a field lead who pitches people on why this is important and makes personal connections with people, follows up with everybody who signs up to canvass multiple times, and then after the canvass is done, continues to make that personal connection, invites people to go hang out at the bar with them after, and encourages them to come back for future shifts and continue to come to the organization. And oftentimes field leads will make pitches about joining DSA. So if you're somebody who comes to a Zohran canvas and you don't really know what DSA is, but you know what Zohran is, you'll get hopefully a field lead oftentimes who then goes, and the reason we're all here is because we're in DSA. And if you want to continue to make this agenda a reality and you want to continue to elect this person, you're going to need to be an organization with other people who believe the same things as you to make all of this continue and grow.
Thanks, team. We might move next to, I believe it's Volshnabov online. If you'd like to unmute and speak.
Yeah. Am I unmuted now? Hello? Hello. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can hear you.
you're good.
Okay. Yes. Winnie, you probably we here this year we are commiserating in Australia the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of a democratically elected Whitlam government by a relic of British, quasi-feudal Norman colonialism, the Governor General, and also our state governors also have the same power to dismiss democratically elected state governments here in Australia, and these officials, the Governor General and the state governors, are under law still representative of the British monarch, and even further down, state governments have the power to undemocratically dismiss democratically elected local councils as well, which they do quite regularly here in Australia. And I was just asking that with Donald Trump, he always strikes me that he says one thing 1 minute and then changes his mind a minute later. And like him could easily be praising Zohran Mamdani at the moment, and in 5 minutes later he could be planning to get rid of Zohran Mamdani. I just want to ask, does Donald Trump or even the your local elected state governors in the USA have the power to dismiss Zohran Mamdani in any way, or does he have quite strong constitutional protections to stop him from actually being dismissed from his office without providing that there is no criminal reason? I doubt if there would be a criminal reason, but just for a purely political reason.
Yes. I don't think the federal government does. For context, in New York in particular, we had a fiscal crisis in 1975 where the mayor would purportedly mismanaged funds, but it's very complicated in what actually happened, but purportedly mismanaged funds. So they created a constitutional amendment where the governor can replace the mayor, but this has not been used ever. And it would be like kind of an anomaly, and it would also have to, I don't think that there's much of a threat to that. And especially the governor has gestured more support for Zohran. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is crazy and kind of disregards our laws on a daily basis. So it's hard to say what he will respect and what he will not. And for example, in our city government, we have laws that we cannot use any local resources to comply with federal immigration enforcement, meaning NYPD is not allowed to, in terms of like civil immigration enforcement, work with any ICE officers to make that happen. If there's like a criminal charge, they can, but because of our sanctuary city policies, they're not allowed to like engage with anything outside of that. And there are times when, our sanctuary city policies kind of get bulldozed by the federal government, pretty much ignoring them. And the city council has to be really proactive about like trying to fight all of those, but we can't fight all of those. And that's part of the reason why it's important to have a city council that does like an oversight authority over both like the mayor, but also like the NYPD and all the individual agencies have their own ways of operating. Because there's been times in this past year where our mayor has complied or colluded with, although I think legally I'm not supposed to use that word, has allegedly colluded with the federal government to do things, which has made it more difficult for us to maintain like our local laws. And Donald Trump has very little regard for our local laws. So do I think he can't legally take Zohran out of office, but he's also can't legally deport citizens. And he has been doing that in the dozens over the past year. So I wouldn't be shocked if he tries to do something crazy. And I would say as immigration advocates in New York City, we are all preparing for the event that the National Guard will be sent to our city in the coming weeks and months, and how we will respond to a militarized force on our streets and in a new way. So that in a way, it's sort of a vaguer way to do it, but the kind of fascist authoritarianism will not certainly not be pushed out entirely by having a socialist mayor, and whether or not Donald Trump will want to kind of teach Zohran a lesson is definitely a question. Also, sorry, you invited a city council wonk onto the call, so you're going to get a lot of city council specific answers with maybe too many technicalities, but I hope it's helpful for some context.
Thank you, Winnie. Now, we have come, I think, in our order to a question that also contains a comment in the chat from Mark's doctor, which I'm loving that name. Winnie, would you like to look through the text there?
Maybe read it so people can.
Yeah, good point. So what Mark's has shared in the virtual chat for those in the room, I want to ask Winnie, now that Mamdani has won, is there interest at all to poll voters who would have voted for Mamdani had he ran as an independent and not under the Democrats? And the comment attached to this is, I believe the DSA needs to run under its own party or a party not under the Dems so they can hold the elected members accountable. I don't believe it's possible under what the DSA is doing now. This is the kind of a question and comment in the spirit of this is something that I've definitely encountered. So I'm really curious about what your response to that might be, Winnie.
Yeah, I think I'm somebody who believes strongly that we have to build towards an independent party, and especially sooner rather than later. The way in which we do that, and also the extent to which we do that is definitely debated within DSA, which is a really big tent organization, and there's a lot of people who fall into a more reformist tendency than I have. But also, you know, I think as our framework exists in the US, we really need to be, I think, united in a lot of these struggles in a big tent framework right now, because we need as many people as possible to be fighting sort of the authoritarianism that we're facing. And that's a very important thing to me. But that being said, I think that there's a lot of room to experiment right now. And I think that there's something to be said about the fact that Andrew Cuomo did not win on the Democratic ballot line, so he made his own ballot line and he ran on that. And if our capitalist counterpoints are not afraid to utilize independents and independent ballot lines, there should be thought about how we can also utilize independent ballot lines. I think there was also a lot of discussion too about if Zohran didn't win in the primary, would we still run him independently as a WFP candidate, like the Working Families Party, on that ballot line, which I think would have been a good move towards, you know, kind of that independence, even if the Working Families Party isn't necessarily the independent party that I think of as representing workers in our city and state and country. Polling is expensive, which is why we didn't do this polling. But if we had money, we would do polling like this. I mean, we got to find somebody to do the polling for us, I think is the question. But that's part of it. So we're kind of at the whim of other people who do these polls. That being said, I think people will continue to try to explain that question in different ways. I think in New York City, we're also trying to work towards reforms that would move us closer to proportional representation. Because, like, for example, our city council was a proportional representation system back, you know, like a century ago. And so we think that, you know, moving towards that can give us space as socialists to run and win greater seats in our city. And, you know, starting with the city allows us to expand and try to fight for these reforms generally. Although, again, proportional representation has positives and negatives for socialists as well. So that being said, I think that there's a lot of excitement around exploring different ways of independence, like trying to see if there's campaigns that we can run that are entirely independent and not on the Dem ballot line, and where those are and what that strategy looks like. But I also think it's going to be a mixed strategy as we continue forward, because that's representative of our broad tent organization, and also because, you know, there's an uphill battle to a lot of the independence just in structurally in our elections in the United States is it's different than a lot of other places. Just to even the hurdles to get your own ballot line are pretty immense and require a lot of funding and capacity and like getting signatures. And you also have to run people like for in New York, you have to run people for governor to run somebody like on the city council level independently. And we don't want to endorse like a Democratic governor so that we can have an independent city council member, because the Democrat for governor would have to be like Kathy Hochul, who is our current governor, who's pretty not socialist in any way, shape, or form. So there's like some complications there. But that being said, in New Jersey and like Jersey City, we're running somebody right now because they have open primaries in their city council who's 100% like running on a Democratic Socialist ballot line. So things like that are exciting, and hopefully we can do more of that in New York City.
Thank you, Winnie. Next we have Alex, and then we'll move back on virtual for Raz, and then we'll come back into the room for Ilias. So Alex.
Hi, Winnie. Thanks. I'm very conscious that it's now after midnight for you, so I think we'll try not to drag this out too much longer. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I know that I know I was saying before all the positive and enthusiastic side of things, but I guess like on the sobriety end of the spectrum, I'm wondering if you could comment on, in particular, the New York Police Department, which is obviously a very, capitalist institution, and I guess in particular the indications that Mamdani has made about, like who the commissioners are going to be, which has sort of been obviously accommodations to the Conservative side. Can you comment on that, and what are your comments about that? Secondly, if you've said this before and I've missed it, sorry, but like any comments about strategies for actually building up the people power, like or pressuring the state to actually provide the funding, like the New York state, which obviously Mamdani doesn't control. What's the approach towards that? And I guess finally, this whole concept of a transition team, especially for a mayor, is a little bit unusual for us in Australia. But how do you read the indications on the sort of the move towards a transition team and that transition approach? Do you feel like this is giving excitement and confidence and a boost to the sort of progressive activist left, or is this more at the angle of accommodations to the big end of town? Like how do you read what's going on in the transition team?
Yeah, transition team is interesting because like I mentioned, the New York City government bureaucracy is so many hundreds of workers. The amount that they have to, I mean, you have both the political appointments, but then just also the bureaucrats who are there regardless of who's mayor, and just the amount of time it takes to fill these hundreds of like political appointments roles is a huge hurdle that they have to overcome. So that's like a very interesting thing about just having to do this, is like, Zohran's not going to be making every like handpicked thing, and it takes like a lot of capacity and energy, and how they're going to begin to kind of make the judgments about who they're appointing that fits the political ideology, while also who they're appointing that has the kind of technical expertise to make sure that trash gets picked up tomorrow, is like a huge balance. And I think part of that is, so his first deputy mayor that he picked was first deputy mayor under Bill de Blasio, Dean, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it's like Foolahan. And I think that was a signal to the kind of technocratic left in New York City to say that he's focused on making sure that he has a competent administration that can do the tasks, the day-to-day tasks of picking up trash and calling school days out at the right time. And then keeping his campaign manager, Al Biscard-Church, who is a DSA member and was his chief of staff back in the state assembly, is more of a gesture to the DSA and left side to say that he's still in line with our priorities, and from the top, it will be managed by somebody who is a socialist and is maintaining. And I think that's what we can expect to see from his continuing organization, is that he's going to have a lot of progressive people who are like technocrats and maybe aren't as left as a lot of DSA folks. And then, you know, having some people that are more of a gesture towards socialists, and how many it'll be in what proportion, and if there will be more bad appointments remains to be seen, and we'll continue to manage that. I think I talked a little bit about Jessica Tisch earlier in the NYPD, but I'll just repeat briefly that yeah, the NYPD is a hurdle to overcome regardless. And so it'll be a real challenge it would be a challenge regardless of who is commissioner. What I'm really interested to see is who he makes. First of all, if he has a first deputy mayor of policing, which was a role that existed and then didn't exist, and it would be like more of an oversight to Jessica Tisch, which could balance out her authority. And then secondly is like, who would be the commissioner of the community safety department that he wants to start to kind of divert a lot of the mental health response away from police, because having somebody good in that department would be a great thing. Yeah, and then how things will happen to pressure Kathy Hochul. It'll be like still a field campaign, kind of similar to how our electoral campaigns are run, like door knocking, getting people to sign petitions, come to rallies, do large scale trips up to Albany to like, you know, do demonstrations in front of the governor's office, things like that, a pressure campaign in that way that is visual and present, tries to get as many New Yorkers coming in as possible.
Thank you, Winnie, for fielding another multi-barreled question. So really extensive responses. We'll move on to Faraz, and then we'll come back to Ilias. I think we might end there because we're conscious that it's getting later and later, and these answers aren't getting any easier or easier. So Faraz, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share.
Hi. Do you think the Epstein files have like some form of influence on Trump's relationship to Mamdani? Just curious.
I mean, I do think that it's part of the reason his polls have been going down, and he was probably trying to just distract from it with like I have to assume. I feel like so much of what he's been doing recently has just been to distract from a lot of that. But who knows? That's maybe beyond my pay grade, I feel.
Thanks, Steve. So Ilias has just stepped away, so I might check in briefly with the room. Was there anyone here who indicated that I missed whilst we wait for Ilias to return? Okay. I had one curious small question while we wait for Ilias to return. Winnie, would you field another one? Seeing some nods? Yeah, lovely. I was curious if, because I'd imagine there's a moment of retrospection after the event of the election that might have invited some lessons of what we're going to do more of next time or what we might do less of. Has anything like that come up that you'd like to share with us here today?
Sorry, can you repeat that question quickly again?
Is there anything that came up after the success of the election that led the team to consider, well, we're going to do more of this tactic and we're going to do less of this tactic, as clearly it's worked because we've got this milestone of success?
I think there's a real debate still is like how people are contending with different lessons from the campaign. And I think different tendencies would say different things. I think a lot of that conversation is playing out in our current discussion and debate around the congressional candidates, like whether or not certain aspects of Zohran's campaign can be replicated onto certain congressional campaigns. So I think that one thing that we probably all are in agreement on is that, you know, these broad communications that excite people are really important, that having a kind of simple and clear policy platform that can, you know, aid people in better understanding different things, and moving people more towards understanding, I guess, in this platform way, like a socialist ideology. And then I think what I hope is that people come away from this feeling less afraid to run unabashedly socialist campaigns. I think sometimes in our organization, some of the tendencies have been afraid to like label themselves as socialists because it is a word that's been so it's become such a dangerous word in the US. But I think this showed that when we really label ourselves strongly as socialists, that we can change people's minds and ideas. Things we don't want to do as much again. I think one thing to note is that like every time in recent memory we've had a lot of success, we've also then had years where maybe we like overplay our hand and take on too much the year after, and then try to like put that energy into too many things. And I'm personally a little bit worried about that in the coming years. But I do know that a lot of people are excited, and so we need to find a good place to continue to put that energy to expand it. And I think really, to be honest, like a lot of the lessons are still to be learned from the campaign. So we'll have to see and maybe follow up on that after we see how things are going, or how the energy from this campaign gets translated into the next projects.
Thanks, Winnie. It makes a lot of sense to me that there's a lot of different tendencies. There might be a lot of different perspectives on what didn't work. So I'll be interested to see what wisdom and lessons emerge with time. Elias, we're going to come to you. Are you okay if we do a quick plug before that? Is that all right? Yeah. So look, we just broadly, before we launch into our final question and answer, just wanted to appreciate everyone who's attended today. We did want to invite people to contribute to the work that we do here at the Socialist Alliance. Labour and resources have been used to organise this today. So what we've done is we've put a invitation in the chat. There'll be a physical hat that'll go around the room if people could spare any resources, finances, or make a donation. We've always, as always, we support separate initiative, the Green Left, for a source of socialist news and commentary in Australia that we invite people to consider subscribing to. And we also have our various branches nationally that we invite people to move through becoming a member, to then becoming an activist, to moving further and further into formally organising. So we just invite people to consider the contribution they can make as they've attended today. Anything further you'd add to that at all, Alex?
Jonathan's going to pass around the hat in the room.
We're going to pass the hat. Thank you, Jonathan. And while people are considering that, we'll invite Elias to ask a final question, and then we'll invite Winnie to give us an answer.
Anyway, I got a bit of an eerie question, and that's about workplace democracy within the DSA. I've had a look around about their policies, and I haven't seen much about that. There might be stuff within the different sort of factions, but within the DSA and within Zohran's campaign, is there any discussion about sort of that regard of workplace democracy and sort of the workers owning more so government infrastructure?
Yeah, I will say one thing that was really amazing is, and this doesn't go exactly to the question, but the Public Sector Workers Union in New York City, DC 37, which is usually a really conservative union, but is really huge because so many New Yorkers are employed by our city government, did endorse Zohran, and they had a huge kind of rank and file movement push to do that, which was amazing to see. And a lot of that was organized by DSA members who work for the city government. And I hope to continue to see that those workers in our city government push to, I guess, hold him accountable and organize their workplaces and things like that. In addition, I think maybe that's one actually thing that I would change is I think that there wasn't enough of his platform that was focused necessarily on workplace rights and expanding that. And I mean, he did talk, one thing is that he wants to increase the minimum wage to $30, which I think is a good start. But also, like, on the city council level, we have bills like Just Cause firing, which would prevent people from being fired without just cause, which would be a helpful thing for being able to organize workplaces. We also have bills to like limit Amazon in New York City that are would be pretty exciting if they get passed under Mamdani's administration, and we hope that they will, because they're sponsored by our socialist city council members. And there's like reforms in that way that we can do to aid, I think, a lot of workplace organizing. And then the question will be, how do we continue to use the opportunity organizing for his administration to, as socialists, embed ourselves in workplaces to organize our coworkers into action through reform groups in the unions that are really top down right now, and try to make them more bottom up, militant unions. And so I think that that's one thing that his campaign didn't focus on as much on, that I wish it focused more on, and that hopefully we can continue to do in the future.
Thank you very much, Winnie. I might invite another applause virtually in the room.
Hey. Thanks, Winnie. Woohoo!
Thank you. Thanks, Winnie. Really appreciate really extensive answers, and something I came away with was there just seems to be an incredible level of technical confidence into the things about the American political system that just go so far over my head alongside the work around socialism. So thanks for bringing all that to bear today. Before you log off and I imagine have a very well-earned rest, is there anything further you wanted to share collectively to anyone today?
I don't know. I'm thank you all so much for your questions, and I hope that my in-depth, very specific answers were helpful in framing things. And yeah, the American political system is kind of set up to make us fail by having all of this technical nonsense that we have to constantly hurdle through, and the amount of like money in our politics, and also like different pieces of random legal, whatever is crazy to try to navigate as a movement where we're constantly learning lessons from each other. And I think that's why it's so important to be willing to experiment with races like this and other things that kind of push forward what we're trying to do, but also, to learn from all of those experiments and be in communication with each other. But I really appreciate it. And I hope that I get to learn more about you all's work in the future, because I feel like now I've gotten to speak to you all a lot about Mamdani, and hopefully sometime I'll get to learn more about the organizing that you all are up to, because it also seems really great and important, and I'm excited about that. But thank you for all your questions. Thanks for having me tonight. I hope we can talk more, and definitely reach out for any more questions, especially if you want specific and technical answers, and I'm your person. But thank you all.